Hello again. Glad you have joined me as we continue browsing through the Bible together. Uh, Today we're going to be continuing in the Gospel of Mark. We've made some progress, but still have a long ways to go. As you will notice, I've got a little longer passage today and it may be difficult to read on the screen, so if you get out your Bibles, you will be able to read it and follow along as is necessary. First thing I notice in this passage is that Jesus was at home. At least that's what Mark said, that Jesus was at home. Now, the interesting questions that came to my mind is, was this Jesus' home? And by that I mean, did he own the house? We think of Jesus as an itinerant preacher that was just kind of a vagabond, for a better word, that he had no resources and traveled around totally dependent upon other people. But that may not have been totally the case. If you think about it, he was 30 years old. He'd been working as a carpenter or a builder, and during that time his father passed away, so as the eldest son he took over the business. And it may have been that he had some resources on his own and owned this house in Capernaum and turned the business over to his brothers and let them begin to run the business while he moved on and began doing exactly what God wanted him to do. Now, in those days, houses were obviously not like they are today. And I did some research and found some pictures of what first century homes might have looked like. The interior would have been pretty sparse. They were not a very big building. Family basically ate and slept there, and that's about it. The Greek word actually can mean anything from a tent all the way up to a temple and everything in between. So this is what the interior of one would look like, and here's a picture of the community, or what would be the exterior of a house. I found it interesting and fascinating to see exactly what a house in the first century would look like. Well, let's move on. I've already talked about whose house is this. We don't actually know. It just says, Mark just says he was at home. Mark also talks about the crowd that was there. Pretty big crowd, but maybe not what we might think of. It was definitely not the 5,000 that he was feeding out in the countryside, but it was big enough to completely crowd out the house, and people had to stand outside if they wanted to hear what Jesus had to say. Another thing that we notice in this passage is that there was a paralyzed man that had some very motivated friends that brought him to Jesus, and through considerable effort, actually, had him laying down at the feet of Jesus. Another thing that's kind of strange is that Jesus overlooked the obvious. Think about it. The roof gets torn off the house, or at least a part of it, and people lower someone down through the roof with ropes, and he's laying there in front of him, and obviously paralyzed, can't walk around by himself. And Jesus totally overlooks that part of our story. Instead, he looks at the man and says he forgave his sins. Kind of a difficult thing for me to get a get a hold of as I look back on it. Of course, the community leaders, scribes, Pharisees, began to question what Jesus was saying and doing. This wasn't the way things were supposed to be. And Jesus eventually responds to their concerns and does a miracle. Jesus reached down and began to help this man. First of all, he helped him where the need was the greatest. And that leads me to a question: what really is helping? Like I said, Jesus overlooked the obvious, the man's being paralyzed, and instead looked inside of him and saw what was separating that individual from God, and was able to forgive his sins, or at least stated that he would. Eventually, of course, he did get around to the healing ministry, but that's another part of the story. What should Christians do today? How are we best able to help people? I think there's some basic questions that have to be asked first. Do you have the resources to help? And by that, I don't always mean physical resources or monetary resources. Obviously, that is critical, because if you don't have any money, you're not going to be able to go out and buy someone transportation so they can get back and forth to work. But you may have the spiritual insights and the shared experiences that you can help that person through the resources that you have. Second question: do you understand the problem? Do you really know what's going on? I need to ask some questions and find out exactly what the problem really is, and not just what it appears to be on the surface. Another important thing to ask is, do you know where help can be found in your community? Do you know where the local resources for the homeless are? Do you know about medical facilities and those types of things? What counseling is available? All of these things are critical if you really want to be a helper in your community. And then another question is, could this person help themselves? Maybe the problem is not that they don't have resources, but they don't know what they have, and they don't know how to really help themselves. A last question is, how will this helping that you're doing impact your relationship and circumstances? Sometimes when you help someone, it changes the relationship entirely. And when that help is given, it can jeopardize relationships. My wife and I had the privilege of working 23 years in the city of Las Vegas with the homeless, the mentally ill, alcoholics, addicts, and people who truly were facing significant needs. When I talk about helping, you need to understand that emergencies are kind of a special category of need. One does what one can within the limits of their ability and their knowledge. If you drive by and see an accident, you may stop and offer help, but you may not be doing CPR if you're not trained, and your best help may be just dialing 911 and getting the professionals there. But emergencies are a special category of need, and not what I'm really looking at in this passage. Now, when we worked in Las Vegas for over 23 years, here are some guidelines that we developed over that time period, and we'll just share them with you right now. First of all, it's always important to pray for guidance. in everything that you're trying to do for someone else, in every way that you're trying to help. Secondly, you need to gain personal knowledge of the resources. I mentioned it earlier, but you do need to gain that knowledge, and if possible, know some of the people working at the agencies. If they know you, your referrals are apt to have a better chance of being accepted. Also, you need to recognize the limits of your ability and your resources. Don't go outside of your personal limits unless you have assistance from someone else who has skills and knowledge that you may not personally possess. It's also helpful to really get to know the person that you are helping. They may have been a friend for some time, or they may be a new acquaintance. And if you can get to know a little bit about them, then you can best see how you would go about giving them assistance. One of the things that Cheryl and I discovered over time is we do not give money directly to the person we're trying to help. Make referrals. You may, on occasion, purchase things that are needed, purchase food for them, but do not give money directly to the person you're trying to help. You lose control of those resources, and they may not be used in a way that you would intend them to be, and to actually give the help the person needs. Another interesting thing is to actually ask the person if they want help and what would be the most help. If you'll remember, Jesus at the pool of Bethsaida said, "Do you want to get well?" And we often step in and try to help from what we see, but the person really has a need that is perhaps entirely different than what we perceive. If you've done all these things and you've prayed about it and you're ready to help, then do what you are able to do. That kind of concerned and caring assistance can heal a lot of bruises and wounds and difficulties that people around you are facing. Well, I hope these thoughts will be helpful to you, and we will continue with this passage in the next video, because we didn't really talk much about what Jesus did and why he did it, and we'll look at that in our next video. Thank you again for watching this one. I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Before you leave, don't forget to click the like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more. Invite your friends, and don't forget to come back and see the next one too. Thank you.